It is really hard for people to believe that a country with so much potential could collapse so completely.
Breaking news in our world lead, Venezuela may be on the brink of no return right now.
This is what it's come to in Venezuela. Emergency surgery by flashlight.
A massive shortage of food and aid in the country is leaving thousands of Venezuelans literally fighting for their lives.
Venezuela was once one of the richest countries in the world.
Venezuela's government today ordered schools and businesses closed. Tomorrow, as a nationwide power failure continues, food and gasoline in Venezuela are running out.
People say that what happened in Venezuela could never happen here in America. But I was there. I am an eyewitness. And I want to tell you, think again.
Hundreds of Venezuelans are fleeing the country.
I was forced to leave my life, my family, and my country behind. Now, I want to tell the story.
Year 2017, I was texting with one of my best friends after arriving from a peaceful demonstration against the Maduro regime. Suddenly he said to me, "Hey man, there is a group of police officers standing right in my front door. What should I do now?" I read this text message and I was horrified. And I said to him, well, do not open the door, go hiding and remain quiet. But after this, I never received a single text message back. Just a terrifying silence. My name is Jorge Galicia. I am a 24 years old Venezuelan political activist. And also I am an asylum seeker here in the US. And I'm about to show you a couple of videos of my homeland, one from the year 1970 and the other one from Venezuela nowadays.
Caracas, the swinging city of Venezuela. Good climate, fine buildings, wide highways with plenty on them. All in all, a pretty nice place to be for many reasons.
We have some breaking news in our world lead. Venezuela may be on the brink of no return right now. Violence and bloodshed erupting in the streets as both sides accuse the other of attempting a coup. Self-proclaimed Venezuelan President Juan Guaido is calling for Venezuelan citizens and members of the military to join him in taking control of the country from socialist dictator Nicolas Maduro, who stands accused of holding a sham election and illegally ignoring the National Assembly. I want to warn our viewers, we're about to show some graphic video of the violence that's taking place in the streets of Venezuela today. You can see members of the military who back Maduro literally mowing down protesters in the street today. As CNN was broadcasting those images, the network was taken off the air by the dictatorial Venezuelan government, and at this point has not been put back on in that country. This afternoon.
So, how did we get from the very first video that you just saw on this screen, where Venezuela is basically being shown as a nice place to live in and as a nice place to be young, to the second video, where Venezuela is shown having all of this political violence and where young people just like me are being hit by a military truck in the middle of the road? How does that happen? And can you imagine something like that, like this happening here in America? Well, today I'm going to try to give an answer to you to that question of what happened to us. But first, I'd like to share with you a little bit of my personal story of experience of how it is to live under the Venezuelan dictatorship. I came from a middle-class family. We were never rich, that's for sure, but I really believe that in the past we used to have a really good life and a happy one. My family and I used to go to restaurants like the one you're seeing in the screen. I used to have the latest versions of my favorite video games, great birthday parties every year when I was a child. It was a really good life. But now, and thanks to the collapse of the system, that situation has changed almost completely. To the point where in my house, we don't even have constant water supply anymore. Electricity is failing all the time. And even food is really hard to come by. Only a little bit more than a year ago, one of my main desires in life was to be able to taste again a piece of hamburger or pizza, because sadly all of those things became luxury to me. But do not believe that this whole situation with me and my family is somehow isolated. Actually, if you compare my family situation with the rest of the Venezuelan population, you would still think that we are still somehow privileged among society. And let me explain you why. For example, my grandma, she suffers from high blood pressure problems, and she needs to take a medication on a daily basis in order to control her condition. And despite all of the difficulties we have seen in Venezuela, we have been able to provide the pills that she needs to take so far, so she's okay. But for majority of Venezuelans, this is not the case. We're seeing how thousands of people are dying because they just cannot find their treatments. And diabetic people die because they cannot find their insulin. People, they cannot find their pills, so they pass away. It's really depressing. And this is, take a look. This is how majority of Venezuelans hospitals look nowadays. And listen, this is before coronavirus. So imagine what the consequences are going to be for us to have to deal with this whole pandemic. We don't have any sort of resources to deal with something like this. It is really sad, and I'm really worried about my country right now because I don't really know what the consequences are going to be. It's going to be catastrophic for sure. And this is only one example of so many I could show you today to demonstrate how bad the country is. If you read the news about my country, you would see headline after headline how horrible the situation is. And because of this nightmare, we have already seen how more than 5 million, it says 4, but it's actually more than 5, have already left the country. And we're going to places like Ecuador, like Peru, like Chile, like Argentina, and majority of Venezuelans don't have enough money to afford an air ticket and not even a bus ticket. So we basically go by walking to reach our destinations. And it is really sad because many of my people have died because they have faced terrible weather conditions, but they rather taking these chances than staying at Maduro's Venezuela. And actually, I according to what I read, I think we already surpassed the Syrian migratory crisis as the biggest migratory crisis going on in the world right now. But for me, this was not it. This I was facing so much other risks because I was, as I told you before, I was a political activist. In the year 2014, I joined the student movement of my university, and I also joined a political party named Vente Venezuela, which is a political party standing for economic freedom, religious freedom, freedom of speech. I mean, basically every single value that makes it possible to live in a free and prosperous society. But in Venezuela, in order to do this kind of things, you have to be a risk taker, and a big one, because the political police is always out there trying to locate opposition leaders that are trying to do something against the regime. And I'm not talking about violent opposition leaders. I'm talking about YouTubers, people on Instagram, on Twitter, bloggers, songwriters. I mean, people that are just trying to speak their mind and to advocate for whatever they believe in. For example, this lady right here, her name is Inés González Árraga, and she was sent to prison because she wrote down a couple of tweets against the dictatorship. They didn't like what she wrote, and that, of course, that was enough reason for them to send her to prison. This guy right here, his name is Joshua Holt. He's an American citizen who was doing a missionary trip in Venezuela to help the poor, and because of this, he was accused of being an American spy in Venezuelan soil, so he was sent to prison. And not even judges are safe from the repressive hand of the regime. This lady right here, her name is Maria Lourdes Afiuni, and she was sent to prison because she ruled a sentence against the dictatorship, and of course they didn't like what she wrote in the sentence, and they accused her of being a traitor or something like that, and she was sent to prison. And This is exactly what happened to me and my friend in the year 2017. Both of us were so deeply involved in the massive demonstrations going on against Maduro in that year. And because of that, sadly, well, he was captured by police. The police broke into his house, in the middle of the night, without a warrant, without any kind of legality or due process, and they took him away. And when I found out that he was taken, well, I was full of fear because he and I were doing exactly the same things at exactly the same location and time. And actually, at the moment, as I just told you, at the moment he was being captured, both of us were texting through our phones. So the police was actually able to read all of the things we were saying throughout in our conversation. So I needed to disappear right away. And I was sent into a religious place where I cannot reveal to you the name of the place, the location of the place, of course, and not even the religion that they follow in this place, because I don't want to take any chance of compromising the safety of the people that run this place in Venezuela. And I was in there and I was in total isolation, meaning that I needed to turn off completely my cell phone, shut down all of my social media accounts. I was not able to communicate with anybody outside that place, not my friends, of course, and not even my family, not my mom, my dad, nobody, total isolation. And this was a really life-changing episode in my life because, well, one day I wasn't a student. I was attending my classes, worrying about my next day exam, worrying about, I don't know, the girl I like, normal stuff. And all of a sudden, I saw myself involved in all of this hiding and persecution situation as if I were some sort of criminal. And of course, I was never something like that. And while I was in this place, I was extremely worried and stressed all of the time. First of all, because of my friend. Because despite the fact that I was not having the best moment in my life, I knew for a fact that he was taking the worst of the situation because, well, he was actually in prison. And he was being beaten on a daily basis. He was forced to eat food in really bad shape. He was forced to share cell room with the worst of the Venezuelan population, meaning rapists, murderers, I don't know, you name it, all kind of criminals and people that you don't really wanna be friends with. And while he was there, I was not able to provide any kind of help to support him because, well, I was also stuck in a sense, right? And I wanted to support him to try to make him out of that place and support his family as well. And somehow I was feeling guilty because I thought internally that everything that was going on with him should be instead happening to me. And but also I was worried about myself because I didn't know for how long this hiding situation was going to be in place. It feels a little bit similar to this whole social distancing that you don't really know when it's going to be over. It was a little bit similar for me, and I was all of the time desperate and worried and stressed because every single night I was thinking things like, will I ever be able to see my mom again? Will I ever be able to resume my ordinary life in Venezuela and to finish my law degree? Will I need to escape through the border, hiding under a truck? Those were the kind of thoughts that were invading my head every single night. It was horrible. You have no clue. But then, after 3 months, 3 really long months, thankfully my friend was released from prison. And because of that, I was also able to resume little by little my ordinary life in Venezuela. But to be honest, I never got to be the same anymore while I was there because I was always living with the constant fear of expecting, the police to show up at the middle of the night, just the way it happened to him 3 months earlier. And well, because of this, I decided to stay away from the political activism in the next year, 2018, not because I stopped believing in what I believe right now, but because I didn't want to compromise the safety of my family, especially my mom. While I was in this place, she didn't have a clue about how well or bad I was doing, where I was, if I was eating properly, if I was even taken. I mean, she almost lost her mind, and I didn't want her to go through the same again anymore. But thanks to this decision, in the following year, 2018, I was able to finish my law degree in Venezuela, and well, because of that, I was able to apply to participate in a great leadership program named Project Arizona, and thankfully I was elected to be part of it. And by the way, the guy who runs this program, his name is Jacek Spendel, and he is an alumni of the Fund for American Studies. So in a way, I was already being connected with the organization, right? But anyway, I was selected to be part of this program, and well, thankfully, I was elected, and that was the reason I was able to, to travel from Venezuela to here to America. And I was supposed to go back to Venezuela on May 1st, but while this was going on, while I was doing this program in Arizona, this was also happening in Venezuela. The appearance of Juan Guaido and his assumption as the legitimate president of Venezuela. And because of this, I started to receive a lot of attention in Phoenix because, well, people wanted to know more about what was going on in Venezuela. So I started to receive a lot of invitations from the local media in Arizona, from student groups at ASUs, from people all over the place who wanted to know more, right? So basically, while I was here, I resumed my activism for the democratic cause in Venezuela. And well, because of that, I decided to claim asylum and not to return, because I know for a fact that after doing all of this, if I go back to my country, I would be sent to prison immediately. And of course, I don't want to go to prison. And actually, only like 3-4 days ago, my Twitter account was hacked by someone in Venezuela. And so the dictatorship back there is actually paying attention to the things I'm doing here. So anyway, let me ask you, how did we get into this point in Venezuela? How did it all begin? Did it all start with the appearance and with the election when we first elected Hugo Chavez as our national president, or maybe we actually have to look even further into the past to understand the causes of all of these political and economic crises? Because while I was at Arizona State University doing this program, I used to talk a lot with progressive in the room, and I used to say to them things like, listen, I know all of you have the best intentions in the world and you want the best for this country, but I believe that your proposals and ideas are going to create the very same environment that led Venezuela into all of these political and economic crises. And every time I said this to them, they got mad at me, and they started saying things like that, well, you know what, you're not really that well informed, because the progressive movement here in America is not advocating for the very same policies followed by Hugo Chavez and then by Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And the first time I heard this argument, I stopped for a second and I thought to myself, well, you know what? These people actually have a point. Because if we're going to be honest about these topics, we have to understand things like, for example, Hugo Chavez came from the military, that he and Nicolas Maduro confiscated thousands of private properties in Venezuela, that they created a paramilitary group named Colectivos, which is basically a group of civilians carrying long weapons and patrolling the streets of Venezuela to avoid any sort of political opposition. and they incarcerated many of his political opponents. I mean, and in that sense, I do believe that the progressive movement is not necessarily the same to Hugo Chavez and to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. But let me ask you once again, how did we reach this point? What did we have before Hugo Chavez? Did we have a fiscally responsible government with a balanced budget? Or maybe we had something much more similar to the kind of welfare state that progressives are advocating for here in America? And in order to answer that question, let's locate this talk for a while in the decade of the 70s. Until this decade, Venezuela was used to grow economically every single year. We had the biggest GDP in the whole Latin American region. We used to have greater GDP than countries like Spain, like China, like Israel. I mean, Venezuela was doing really well economically. But then, in the year 1975, two things happened that completely reshaped our history until today. Under the presidency of this guy right here, his name is Carlos Andrés Pérez, our oil industry was nationalized. That was the first of those things. I don't know, I guess you already know, but Venezuela has the biggest oil reserves in the entire world. And by the time we used to be one of the main oil producers in the entire world. And the second thing that happened was that we saw a huge increase, huge boom among the oil prices in the global market, quite the opposite of what's going on right now today, right? But the combination of these two factors allowed the government to spend much more because they were receiving a lot of new resources. And his administration decided to go after the problem of poverty, because that was true. There was still a lot of poverty going on in Venezuela, declining every single year, but there was still a lot. And they decided to tackle that situation by creating a bunch of new social programs of subsidies. And I'm going to show you some examples of the kind of things that they did in this year. I'm only going to be able to show you a couple of examples, because if I wanted to show you the whole list, we would still stay here until the end of the quarantine, and I don't think you would enjoy that much. But one of the things they created, free college for everybody. The government created this social program, this designed to grant scholarships to every Venezuelan who wanted to participate to study at the university level. The only requirement, to receive an admission letter from any major university, even around the world. So because of that, we saw thousands of Venezuelans going to study to the very best universities of the world, meaning Oxford, Harvard, Columbia, I don't know, you name it, for free. None of them was required to pay back to the state a single penny. And it didn't even matter whether they graduated or not. The second of those things, free healthcare for everybody. The government created more than 20 public hospitals where any Venezuelan, regardless of their condition, could attend. You could be poor, you could be rich, it didn't matter. All you had to do was to enter to one of these facilities, and there you would receive free medical attention and free medical health care, of course. And even the gasoline was being subsidized by the time. Venezuela has always been famous for having the cheapest gasoline rates among the entire world. And this was never because of free market and competition, but because of these huge government subsidies. And by the way, right now, because of this situation, we don't even have gasoline anymore in Venezuela. And the country right now is collapsing. My mom cannot ride around anymore because she needs to save what the little gasoline she has left in the tank for emergencies. This is going on right now. But anyway, what happened next? In the year 1978, as I told you, three things happened that reshape completely our history until today because all of the things that we saw. The first thing, massive levels of inflation for the very first time in our modern history, which is really sad because the Bolivar, our national currency, used to be one of the most stable and strong currencies among the entire world. But why did this happen? Well, because the politicians by the time were so committed to the idea of not making any single cut to the existing social programs and subsidies. And even beyond that, many of them were elected under the promise of expanding even more all of these social programs and subsidies. And the only way to do this without the big old revenue was through raising taxes, printing new money, borrowing new money. So they did all they could to keep the machine and the welfare state going, and the consequence was this: huge levels of inflation. And what this means is that, for example, if you let's say if you go to a restaurant today to get a hamburger, and let's say you spend let's say this hamburger would cost you today 4 bolívares. But if you go to the very same restaurant, let's say 2 weeks later, you would find the very same hamburger for, let's say, 8 bolívares. So this means, and while this is happening, your salary is remaining in the very same position. So what this means is that society in general was becoming poorer and poorer. And the dramatic situation of this is that this is not only happening with hamburgers, this is happening with medicine, this is happening with housing, this is happening with basically every single product of the economy. So it was really, really, really chaotic. The second thing that happened was that we saw a culture of dependency created in Venezuela. In the year 1989, Venezuelans decided to re-elect this guy for a second term to be president because they thought, well, if he was the mastermind behind all of these great social progress and subsidies, if we put him back again to power, he would find a way to make all of these social programs back to work because, well, as you just saw, economic situation in Venezuela was declining with the pass of the years. So they re-elected him, but surprisingly enough, he came with new ideas to power. He and his team realized that the levels of spending in Venezuela were no longer sustainable. So he decided to go after some great reforms that were pointing in the right direction. He tried to erase many of the social programs that he created in his first term, and he also tried to eliminate many of the subsidies that he created in his first term. So basically, he was trying to unwalk many of the things that he did in his first administration. But what happened? It was already too late. People were already used to the idea of living out of government assistance, and many people in Venezuela didn't really have a clue about how to make a living without, government assistance, of course. And because of this, just one day after he announced the reforms, this happened, the Caracazo Revolt, which is was basically one of the most violent episodes in our modern history. Thousands of Venezuelans went like crazy to the streets to riot against the government. They started looting private businesses. It was really chaotic. And sadly, we saw how hundreds of Venezuelans lost their lives because of the clashes between the military forces and the population that were protesting in the streets. And the third thing that happened was the appearance of Hugo Chavez himself. In the year 1992, he tried to overtake the government by the use of force. He failed badly, but his attempt gave him a lot of popularity among Venezuelans because, well, basically he was rooting for the very same ideas that were popular among society during that time. He was telling people things like, listen, all of you are entitled to have all of these social programs, have subsidies, and if you're seeing cuts to your way of living, it is only because of the greedy of the capitalistic sector and the evil of neoliberalism. And and sadly this speech really resonated really well among Venezuelans. And after this, he received years later, he received a pardon from the presidency, which allowed him to compete in the 1998 elections, and well, he won. And as a president, as I just told you, he managed to confiscate thousands of private properties in Venezuela. To create this paramilitary group, to incarcerate many of his political opponents, and he changed the constitution, he changed the flag, he changed the name of the country. And after more than 20 years, we haven't been able to remove the system that he created in Venezuela and that now endures under Nicolás Maduro. So I would definitely agree to the idea that the progressive movement is not necessarily the same to Hugo Chavez and to Nicolás Maduro, but I would also say that their ideas and proposals could create the very same environment that led Venezuela into the appearance of Hugo Chavez and to Nicolás Maduro. It worries me a lot to see how the levels of spending keep growing and growing and growing every single year, regardless of which party is in power. We see how the Congress and the presidency keeps flipping between Democrats and Republicans, and apparently it doesn't matter anymore because the deficit keeps growing, the debt keeps growing, the public spending keeps growing, and I believe that if we don't find a way to put a break into all of this massive spending on time, well, I think the United States, we're going to see a really bad economic situation in the future. And will we end up here like Venezuela? I don't know, maybe, or maybe not. But we could end up like places like Greece, like Argentina. I mean, history is full of examples of societies that collapsed because they were not able to control the levels of spending on time. So if I were you, I would definitely stay away from politicians that offer me free college tuition, free housing, or free whatever, because as you just saw in Venezuela, we used to have all of these, but it was never free for us. It costed us billions of dollars and ultimately our own democracy and freedom. So before I open the space for questions and answers, I'd like to share with you the story behind this little bracelet that you see right here. This was made by my friend who was in prison during his prison time. It is all made of plastic bag. I don't know if you can notice this, but when we were able to meet again, he gave me this to me, and it is the most symbolic gift I have ever received in my life, because this works as a reminder of my purpose in life, which is no other than to keep fighting for justice, keep fighting for liberty wherever I am, because this was the product of an injustice, and I just cannot stand waking up every morning, seeing this, and not taking any kind of action to try to improve this world. So thank you so much for listening to my message today, and thank you for supporting the Fund for American Studies. I think what this institution is doing is absolutely great, and actually I think this is the way to avoid. I wish that we had something like the Fund for American Studies in Venezuela in our early years to avoid going through all of this. So thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Jorge. As a reminder, we've got some time for questions. If you have questions for Jorge, there is a button on the bottom of your screen with Q&A. Click that button and you can enter your questions there. Jorge, our first question comes from Kathy, and her question is, what kind of response do you get from students who hear your presentation?
Thanks, Kathy, for the question. Well, that so far, everybody I've been talking to has been really respectful. Even those that don't necessarily agree with what I'm saying, they have shown a lot of respect every single place I go. So I really appreciate that. But I think people are getting the message, and the kind of fightbacks that I usually get is from people that usually say that, you know, like, what about the Nordic model? What about Norway? What about Sweden? Those kind of questions usually come a lot. And what I always say to them is that, well, even despite the fact that these countries have generous welfare state, those countries are not socialist at all. They respect private property. They have free market. They don't go into overspending to run all of these programs that they have. And actually, many of these countries are in many cases even more free market oriented than the United States as a country itself. So it is not accurate for them to claim that these countries are socialists, and that this is the message that I usually bring to them. So the reactions are, in general, really positive whenever I give the message.
Thanks, Jorge. Our next question comes from Milt. What do you think will be the final outcome of this fight in Venezuela? Will your country be able to throw off socialism in the future?
To be honest, right now I'm really optimistic about the future of Venezuela. Even right now, the present is not that beautiful, but I think my hope relies on the rest of the world, to be honest, because I think Venezuela right now is creating a lot of problems to the region. I mean, this massive immigration that we're seeing, these rivers of people coming from Venezuela, sadly, this is creating a lot of problems for the receivers, because I mean, not everybody that is living in Venezuela are people like me. We're seeing a lot of criminals going. We're seeing drug dealers. I mean, all kind of people are leaving to reach their destinations, and this is creating a lot of problems to the society, to the neighboring countries. And you know, right now, I think the U.S. administration is paying close attention to what's going on in Venezuela. And I don't know, the Attorney General Barr recently indicted Maduro as a drug dealer and also as a terrorist, and many people from his inner circle. So the U.S. Navy just deployed, in the Caribbean Sea to try to tackle all of the even during the pandemic. They deployed the Navy to try to stop all of the flow of drug that's going on in that place because of the Maduro regime. So I think eventually, because of all of this pressure, we're going to reach a good solution. My fear is that this solution might be, sadly, real violent. But to be honest, we have tried every possible solution. You know, we have to go through elections. They cheat. We have to go through negotiations. They don't abide by their word. We have tried to reach the Vatican, and then the UN and the European Union to try to mediate on all of this. And so far, they just don't want to give up power. So sadly, I think the solution, if we are ever going to see a solution, is going to be terrible, violent, bad. I think the consequences of letting socialism stay for us is much worse than just getting into a fight with these guys. I think I would like to see some my own people fighting against this tyranny, because, well, that's the way it should be.
Thanks, Jorge. Our next question comes from Greg, and he's wondering, have you ever experienced hostility or protests against you when you go on to college campuses and speak?
Not Not myself. I mean, nobody has shown up in this in my talk to protest or do something against me. But in Indianapolis, I did see in Marian University, the group that was hosting me saw how all of their flyers were vandalized by socialist students there. They ripped them off. They wrote all sorts of things in my face to, claiming all kind of things, that I was a traitor to the Venezuelan cause. I don't know what they meant with that. That I was a fascist and stuff like that. But none of these people actually show up to the presentation. So, and also in University of North Texas, someone took a picture of the event. They didn't come in, but they took a picture of it and they started to say a lot of nasty things in social media. But again, they didn't show up to the to the presentation. So I would say, as I told you, so far everybody has been so respectful, and the ones who has not been that respectful, they don't show up. So they are cowards.
Thank you, Jorge. As a follow-up to that one, our next question is from Freyden. She's wondering, have you gotten any surprisingly positive responses when you were on college campuses?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, in Texas, I was approached by two students, and they said to me that they are Democrats. I mean, they are liberals, but they were really well impressed about the talk, and they said to me things like, "Listen, I didn't really want to come to this because all of the bias that's going on against these kind of messages, but." After it, they said, "Listen, you have my respect, and I really appreciate you coming." I don't know if they changed their mind or not, but at least they seem to be well impressed. And I think I see episodes like this every time I visit a campus. So I think we're creating an impact here, right? And I hope so.
I would agree. Our next question comes from Doug. He's wondering, when life gets back to our new normal, do you anticipate continuing your messaging on college campuses?
Absolutely. I want to do this right away. I was having a great time by doing this. I was enjoying it so much. I mean, having the opportunity to speak with all of these kids was really awesome. And also the opportunity to know so much more about the American culture, visiting all of these places that are not necessarily touristic places, but seeing it, like going deeply into America and know many different things about the culture, and I don't know, I'm really grateful about this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to keep doing this. I'm really sad about this whole thing with coronavirus, because my agenda was full of events, and well, many of them are being postponed, of course, until further notice, but I definitely want to keep doing this as much as I can.
That's exciting to hear. Jorge, our next question comes from Cindy. She's wondering, what do you say to those people who claim those, quote, other socialist countries just never did it right and it wasn't true socialism?
Well, they have to look at the facts of what's happened in Venezuela. I mean, all of the expropriations against the private property. For example, Venezuela, the people say, no, that was not real socialism. I mean, our main industry as a country, where most of our income comes from, is the oil industry, and the oil industry was, was getting into the hands of the state. So, means of production in the hands of government. That's pretty socialist to me. So, they just need to see the facts, all of the violations against private property, all of the massive control, central control of the economy and planification. All of these are socialist policies that were being followed in Venezuela, and well, this was the reason of the collapse.
actually think that's why your presentation is so important, Jorge. Our next question comes from Lois. Are there still a lot of people in Venezuela who want all the free stuff? Do you see a lot of demand for that culture of dependency that you referenced?
Maybe they want it, but government is not able to provide any kind of things anymore because we are bankrupt, and I think this is creating a lot of issues for Venezuelans. But I think this also creates a great opportunity for us to offer a new set of ideas because government is not able to provide free stuff anymore. People are realizing this, and right now, the whole idea of socialism in Venezuela is extremely unpopular, and this is something really relatively new about like what 5 years, 6 years from now. Because in the past, let me say this to you: the way the opposition in Venezuela used to engage in fight against Hugo Chavez and against Nicolas Maduro, when there was an election coming, because the opposition used to offer things like, listen, if Hugo Chavez is giving you this right now, we're gonna give you the double. So this was the argument. There was almost nobody making the argument for lowering the levels of spending or liberating the economy and protecting private property. Nobody was actually advocating for this. Only my political party, and to be honest, that this political party is being led by Maria Corina Machado, a really famous opposition leader in Venezuela. But despite this fact, the party was not really that big. So, but right now this is not the case anymore. We are seeing political parties that were aligned with international socialists. They are turning off his affiliation with this international coalition of parties, and we're seeing political parties are really rethinking the way they do politics in Venezuela because they know that the actual word of socialism is extremely unpopular now. So I think we have already woke up, and we know for a fact now that free stuff do not lead to good stuff. But it took us the hard way to learn. That's what we're trying to avoid here, right?
Exactly. Jorge, our next question comes from Jim, and he's wondering, do economics professors ever show up at your talks? Or professors who are doing Venezuelan studies? If so, what do they say?
I don't know if they were economic professors, but in University of the Ozarks, a lot of faculties show up to my talk, and that was really challenging because many of them were left-leaning, but many of them were also classical liberal leaning. So they started throwing like hard questions, and we got into a really intensive debate, really respectful, that's true, but really intense. And then even between the faculties, the professors, they started arguing against each other. It was really awesome situation right there at the University of the Ozarks. But in general, every time I go to a university, the people I talk to are generally students, maybe 1 or 2 professors, but that's it. And yeah, they ask questions, but they, as I told you, really respectful, and I don't know if that answered the question, but that's how it.
I think that was great. Our next question comes from Susan, Jorge. She's wondering, of the policy positions that you are hearing advocated for by prominent socialist politicians here in the US, is there one that worries you the most if it were to be adopted here in the United States?
Well, of course, I think I don't know if I should pick one, because we're seeing so many crazy proposals like the Green New Deal or Medicare for all, and or free college tuition for all. I mean, these kind of things really sound great, but I think if we ever apply these kind of things, we're going to drive the country directly into bankruptcy. And I mean, I don't know if I should pick one, but this whole set of ideas and all of these bad feelings toward the top 1%, I think that we had the very same message in Venezuela. And guess what? We went against the billionaires and millionaires of Venezuela, and guess what? They just left the country. They didn't suffer at all. They have, you know, in Panama, they have this saying. They say things like that the best economic minister that Panama has ever had was Hugo Chavez, because all of our millionaires were leaving the country to invest in Panama. So Panama was really saw benefits from our collapse. So I don't know what to say. It is not just one proposal. This is the whole set of ideas that we have to fight here.
I'd agree. Our next question, Jorge, comes from Dan, and actually a couple people have asked similar questions. When the government was confiscating private property, how much did the citizens resist? Had the government already removed the right to own guns? Did you ever have the right to own guns? And what did that look like?
Yeah, at the beginning, I think we saw a lot of resistance from you know, the population. We have a really famous case. His name is Jose Brito, and he's like a martyr for all of the private property owners in Venezuela, because he saw his land being taken by the government, and he went into self-starvation. I don't know if that's a good way to say it in English. But you know, he was really mediatic, and everybody was paying attention. The whole world was paying attention to his cause, but the regime at the end didn't care about him going into this protest to recover his land, and they just let him starve to death. So he died. Sadly, I don't think we saw a lot of like physical resistance to try to stop all of these confiscations. Venezuela, to be honest, I don't think we ever had such a big gun culture like the one you have here, especially in the South. However, we did see in the year 2012 a big push from Hugo Chavez to put in place a lot of gun control regulations, claiming, you know, to be for safety reasons. But for me now, it is obvious that he was just seeing the future, and he saw in gun control a way to control even further the society and to avoid any sort of rise up from the people. So yeah, I don't know if we ever, I mean, before Hugo Chavez, the ability for us to have weapons was greater, not as much as, I mean, it was never as easy as it could be in Texas or Arizona, I guess, but I would guess, but yeah, we saw that little liberty that we had in the past going away with Hugo Chavez and with Nicolas Maduro. And by the way, that didn't stop criminals from having guns. Actually, Venezuela is right now, used to be or is right now one of the most violent countries in the entire region, because criminals didn't give up their weapons. They just kept you know, committing theft and stuff like this. But actually, and this is also stopping right now, because even criminals are so poor that they cannot afford to buy ammunition, and it is worthless for them to afford ammunition and go to steal people that don't even have something worthy of stealing anymore. So they are just leaving the country. It's crazy what's going on right now in Venezuela. So, but yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
Alrighty, thanks, Jorge. We have time for one more question, and I will apologize because we haven't had an overwhelming response with questions from everybody. But in order to keep us on time, this will be our last question. Jorge, this one is from Dean, and he's asking, even after people in the US see what's happened in Venezuela, Why do you think so many of these same people still support candidates like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
Well, to be honest, I do believe that America needs to go through a lot of reforms. I mean, I think, for example, the medical, the healthcare system needs reforms. I mean, I do believe that prices are extremely high in America, but it's not necessarily because of free market. It's probably quite the opposite. It's because government interference. It's because of all of this third-party system to pay our bills that we have created here. And also, I think we are seeing a lot of high prices among college tuition. But again, it is not because of free market. It is because of federal loans are rising the prices way up really high. So I think the classical liberal movement needs to explain to society these kind of things so they can understand. Listen, we know there are problems going on right now in American society, and these problems are affecting you. But the solutions that these people are offering you are just going to create more problems and to double the expand of the problems that we already have. So, I mean, it makes sense for young people to fall into these proposals because they sound good and because they talk about real issues going on right now in America, but what they are offering is not the solution to any of the problems that's existing right now. So we need to go out there, offer solutions, offer good policies that would actually solve the problems that we're facing right now in America, because that's true. America is not a perfect society. It's better, of course, than many other places in the world, but we still have things to fix. And by the way, if anyone should want to ask further, here's my contact information for social media, and also you can ask people from TIFAS for my email, and there you can reach me whenever you want. I'm available to have a discussion, to have this discussion even further. So thank you again for participating today.
Thank you again, Jorge. And thank you all again for joining us for our webinar today, Venezuela, My Story, Your Future. We appreciate you joining us. I hope you will all agree with me when I say we need college students all over the US to hear this incredible story of the rise of socialism and ensuing collapse of the economic system in Venezuela. As Jorge mentioned, we are already instituting plans to ensure that Jorge and his colleague in this project, Andres, can make up for lost time when colleges reopen, hopefully in the fall. As we conclude, I would encourage you again to offer your feedback on the webinar in the following survey. I promise it really will only take you about a minute to fill out. You'll also have a chance there to share with us campuses or groups that you think should host Jorge's presentation. So please don't skip the chance to give us your thoughts. Our webinar will be available to download and watch later. We will be sharing that with you all in the next couple of days. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to email me at matt@tfas.org. In closing, I would like to offer a special thanks to our investors who have joined us today. Without your support, projects like this one we just heard about would not be able to exist. And it's because of your dedication to TFAS and the cause of liberty that we can impact tens of thousands of lives every year. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to our next webinar with you in the coming month. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.